Welcome to Healthy Kidneys After 60. I am your host, Jane Pauley, and today we are touching upon a subject that is often whispered about in doctors' offices, but rarely discussed with the urgency it deserves in our living rooms. We are talking about the silent hours of the night, the time when we think we are simply resting, but our bodies are navigating a complex landscape of risks. Joining me today is a man who has spent over 25 years at the intersection of neurosurgery and medical journalism, a voice of clarity and compassion whom you all know well from CNN and his extensive work on brain health. Dr. Sanjay Gupta, it is an honor to have you here to help our listeners understand how to protect their futures while they sleep.
Thank you, Jane. It is truly a privilege to be here with you and your audience. You know, in my years in the operating room and reporting from across the globe, I have realized that the most profound health transformations often come from the smallest adjustments in our daily lives. When we talk about people over 60, the stakes for these small habits become much higher. I am looking forward to sharing some of these insights today because I believe that understanding what happens between the sheets at night can be the difference between waking up to a normal day or facing a life-altering event. It is a conversation about empowerment, not fear.
Dr. Gupta, I want to start with a scenario that haunts so many families, one that I have heard far too often in my years of reporting. It is that chilling story of a husband and wife who say goodnight perfectly fine, perhaps laughing about a movie they just watched, only for the morning to bring a devastating silence. One of them wakes up, reaches over, and realizes their partner cannot speak or cannot move half of their body. It feels like a lightning strike, completely random and cruel. Why is it that the transition from sleep to wakefulness is so often the moment when a stroke or a cardiac event makes itself known? Is there something inherently dangerous about the act of sleeping as we cross that threshold of 60? Or are we missing the warning signs that are actually screaming at us in the dark?
Jane, you have touched on the very heart of the anxiety that many of my patients feel. That image of the morning surprise is, unfortunately, a reality I have seen hundreds of times in the emergency room. But what I want to tell everyone listening right now is that these events are rarely as random as they appear to be. When we close our eyes, we think our body is just shutting down for maintenance, but it is actually performing a high-wire act. For someone over 60, the margin for error on that wire gets thinner. During sleep, your blood pressure naturally fluctuates, your breathing patterns change, and your oxygen levels can dip. If you have underlying issues like stiffening arteries or what we call obstructive sleep apnea or OSA, those silent hours become a period of intense physiological stress. The American Heart Association has been very clear about this. OSA is not just about loud snoring. It is fundamentally linked to high blood pressure and a significantly increased risk of stroke. When you aren't breathing properly at 3:00 a.m., your brain is essentially gasping for air while you are unconscious. Your heart has to work overtime to compensate for that lack of oxygen, pumping harder against constricted vessels. By the time the sun starts to peek through the curtains, the body is exhausted from a battle it shouldn't have been fighting. That is often why we see that morning surge in blood pressure, a sudden violent spike as the body tries to wake up, which can trigger a clot to break loose or a vessel to fail.
It is terrifying to think that we could be fighting a battle for our lives while we are completely unaware of it. You mentioned the American Heart Association and this link between breathing and stroke, which makes me wonder if we have been looking at health all wrong. We focus so much on what we eat at the dinner table or how many steps we get on our pedometers during the day, but we treat sleep as if it is a passive, safe zone where nothing can go wrong unless we have a bad dream. Are you saying that the way we position our bodies, the way we manage the air in our bedrooms, and even the way we breathe at night might be just as important, if not more important, than the cholesterol medication we take or the salads we eat for lunch? Is it possible that we are accidentally sabotaging our brain health simply because we haven't been taught how to sleep for our age?
That is exactly the shift in perspective we need to have, Jane. Think of it this way. If you were told that for 8 hours every day, you were going to enter an environment with fluctuating oxygen and unpredictable pressure on your heart, you would prepare for it, wouldn't you? You would make sure you had the right equipment and the right posture. Yet, we spend a third of our lives in bed without a second thought. As we age, the structural integrity of our airways changes, and our neurological reflexes that keep us breathing steadily can become less sharp. There are at least 7 silent habits that I see constantly in my practice. Things like the specific angle of your head, how you use your blankets, or even that glass of wine before bed that are quietly stripping the brain of the oxygen it needs to survive the night. We often mistake a deep sleep for a healthy one, but if that deep sleep is actually a state of oxygen deprivation because your tongue has collapsed against the back of your throat, it is anything but healthy. Tonight, I want to pull back the curtain on those habits. I want to talk about how Michael, a patient of mine, thought he was doing everything right by sleeping flat on his back, only to find his speech slurring by sunrise. I want to talk about why some people feel more tired after 8 hours of sleep than they did when they went to bed. The good news, and I want everyone to hear this clearly, is that once we identify these triggers, we can change the trajectory. We can move from a state of vulnerability to a state of protection. By the end of our talk, I'll share 3 very specific golden steps that can be implemented tonight to make that bedroom a sanctuary again rather than a place of risk. It's about taking back control of those silent hours.
Dr. Gupta, I have spoken to so many seniors who take immense pride in their sleeping habits, believing that lying flat on their back is the gold standard for spinal health and a peaceful night. They often tell me that this position feels like the most natural way to rest, almost like a soldier at attention, but in a state of complete relaxation. However, you have hinted that what feels right for the bones might be a hidden trap for the brain after 60. Especially when we consider how the gravity of that position affects everything from our tongue to our blood flow. Could you walk us through why this common habit can suddenly turn into a medical emergency, and what specific yellow flags should a person look for when they wake up in the morning feeling just a little bit off? Perhaps with a sensation they dismiss as just having slept on their arm the wrong way.
Jane, you have described a very dangerous misconception that I see in clinical practice almost every week. To illustrate this, I want to tell you about a man named Michael Reynolds, who is 68 years old and lives at 2147 Maplewood Drive in Tampa, Florida. Michael was a retired engineer, a man of precision who always slept on his back because he thought it was best for his posture. One Tuesday morning, he woke up and reached for his water glass, but his right hand felt heavy, almost like it belonged to someone else. When he tried to call out to his wife, his words came out thick and distorted, as if his tongue was twice its normal size. He thought he had just slept on it wrong, a phrase we hear so often. But the reality was much more somber. Michael had undiagnosed obstructive sleep apnea. When he laid flat on his back, gravity caused the soft tissues in his throat and his tongue to collapse backward, narrowing his airway to the size of a tiny straw. Throughout the night, his brain was starving for oxygen and his heart was racing to keep up. That heaviness in his arm and the slurred speech weren't just a bad night's sleep. They were the symptoms of a transient ischemic attack, or a TIA, which is essentially a warning shot from the brain that a major stroke is imminent.
It is deeply unsettling to realize that someone like Michael, who was so intentional about his health, could be blindsided by something as simple as gravity. When you say warning shot, it sounds like the body is trying to negotiate for its life before the final blow falls. For our listeners who are sitting at home right now, perhaps feeling a bit of that same morning grogginess or a temporary numbness, how do they distinguish between a harmless muscle ache from a firm mattress and this perfect storm of low oxygen, high blood pressure, and a dangerous sleeping position that you are describing? What is actually happening inside the arteries when that morning surge meets a night of restricted breathing?
That is the critical question, Jane, because the difference is often found in the timing and the combination of factors. In Michael's case, he was also keeping his bedroom very cold and forgot to stay hydrated, which makes the blood more viscous or thicker. When you combine thick blood with a night of gasping for air due to lying flat, you create an environment where clots love to form. For a senior, the blood vessels are naturally less elastic than they were at 30. So when the sun comes up and the body releases a natural burst of cortisol and adrenaline to wake you up, what we call the morning surge, your blood pressure spikes. If your brain has been deprived of oxygen all night because your airway was collapsed, that pressure spike hits a system that is already fragile. It's like turning a high-pressure fire hose on a garden pipe that is already brittle. Michael was lucky because his symptoms faded within an hour, but many are not. I told him that he needed to stop viewing the flat back position as a badge of health. For someone over 60 with a tendency to snore, we often recommend elevating the head of the bed or using a wedge pillow. Even a slight incline of 20 to 30 degrees can use gravity to keep the airway open rather than letting it close shut. It is a small change, but for Michael, it was the change that likely saved him from a permanent disability.
So we are looking at a situation where the body's natural waking mechanism becomes its own worst enemy because of how we spent the previous 8 hours. It sounds like we need to be much more vigilant about those minor morning issues. If someone wakes up with that thick tongue feeling or a hand that won't quite cooperate, even if it goes away in 10 minutes, what is the very first thing they should do? Should they be calling their doctor immediately? Or is there a way to test if this is a true TIA versus just a temporary lack of circulation?
Jane, I cannot emphasize this enough. If you experience slurred speech, facial drooping, or one-sided weakness, even if it lasts for only 60 seconds and then vanishes, you must seek emergency care. Do not wait for it to happen again. In the medical world, we say time is brain. Every minute you wait, millions of neurons could be dying. For Michael, that morning was a wake-up call in every sense of the word. We got him into a sleep study, adjusted his blood pressure, medication timing, and most importantly, changed his sleeping position. He had to learn to sleep on his side or with his head significantly elevated. We often think of these things as inconveniences, but I told Michael to think of that wedge pillow as a life support device that doesn't require a plug. It's about ensuring that your brain never has to fight for a breath while you are dreaming.
Dr. Gupta, there is a certain pride in being a heavy sleeper. We often hear people say they can sleep through a thunderstorm or that they put their head down and don't move until the alarm goes off. We've always associated that with deep, restorative rest. But after hearing you talk about Michael, I'm starting to wonder if that stillness is actually a mask for something much more alarming. Is it possible that what we perceive as a deep, uninterrupted sleep is actually the brain being so overwhelmed by a lack of oxygen that it doesn't even have the energy to wake us up? How do we reconcile this idea that sleeping like a log might actually be a sign that our brain is in distress?
You've hit on a very profound and counterintuitive truth about aging and sleep, Jane. Many people over 60 believe that if they aren't waking up tossing and turning, then their sleep is perfect. But as a doctor, I worry about the silent struggle. When a person has obstructive sleep apnea, their breathing literally stops for 10, 20, or even 60 seconds at a time. The oxygen levels in the blood drop precipitously. In a healthy younger person, the brain detects this drop and triggers a microarousal. You might gasp or shift position slightly to open the airway. But as we age, those triggers can become blunt. You might stay in a deep-looking sleep while your oxygen saturation falls from 98% down into the 80s or even 70s. This is what I call microsuffocation. The American Heart Association notes that this chronic lack of oxygen band DAME causes the walls of the blood vessels to become inflamed and the heart to enlarge from the strain. So while you think you are sleeping like a log, your brain is actually drowning in slow motion. You wake up feeling exhausted with a foggy brain and a headache, and you blame it on getting old, but it's actually the result of a night-long battle for air.
That phrase, drowning in slow motion, is going to stay with me. It's a terrifying thought that we could be so disconnected from our own survival instincts. It seems the real danger isn't just the lack of air, but the fact that we don't realize it's happening. If our internal alarm system is failing us as we get older, what are the external signs? If I am the spouse of a heavy sleeper, or if I live alone, what are the clues that my oxygen levels are dipping into that danger zone? And why is that morning surge you mentioned earlier so much more lethal when the night has been spent in this low oxygen state?
The clues are often found in the mundane details of your morning. Do you wake up with a very dry mouth or a sore throat? That often means you were mouth breathing or gasping. Do you have a dull, throbbing headache that fades after an hour of being upright? That is a classic sign of carbon dioxide buildup in the blood from poor ventilation. But the most dangerous part is indeed the morning surge. Research in the AHA journals highlights that for many seniors, blood pressure naturally peaks between 3 o'clock a.m. and 6 o'clock a.m. If you have been low on oxygen all night, your sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response, is already haywire. Your body is flooded with stress hormones because it thinks it's dying. When you then add the natural morning blood pressure spike on top of that existing stress, the system reaches a breaking point. This is why we see so many strokes and heart attacks in those early hours. We need to stop equating uninterrupted sleep with healthy sleep. If you are snoring loudly, or if you feel like you've run a marathon when you wake up, you need to ask your doctor for a sleep evaluation. It's not about how long you slept, it's about how well you breathed while you were doing it.
It sounds like we need to redefine what rest actually means. It's not just the absence of consciousness, it's the presence of steady, reliable oxygen. You mentioned that we can optimize this through hydration and medication timing. Can you explain the role of water in this? Many seniors avoid drinking water in the evening because they don't want to wake up to use the bathroom. But it sounds like that might be another silent mistake that makes the blood more prone to clotting during those critical early morning hours.
It is a delicate balance, Jane. I call it the hydration paradox. If you are dehydrated, your blood becomes more like molasses, thick and slow moving. In the early morning, when your blood pressure is surging and your vessels are trying to adapt, having thick blood significantly increases the risk of a clot forming or getting stuck in a narrow artery in the brain. However, I understand the fear of falling during a midnight trip to the bathroom. My advice is to hydrate consistently throughout the day and then take small, deliberate sips in the evening. Don't go to bed parched. Also, talk to your doctor about the timing of your blood pressure medication. For some, taking a portion of their dose in the evening can help dampen that dangerous morning surge. It's about creating a buffer for your cardiovascular system so that when the sun comes up, your body is prepared for the transition, not struggling to survive it. We want to ensure that your brain is bathed in oxygen and your blood is flowing smoothly, regardless of how deeply you think you are sleeping.
Dr. Gupta, we've talked about the dangers of lying flat on one's back, but there is another group of sleepers who feel they've found the perfect solution for warmth and security, those who sleep on their stomachs. I've heard many women specifically say that tucking their hands under their chest and burying their face in the pillow makes them feel protected and warm, especially in those drafty winter months. It's a habit they've carried since childhood. But as we look at the mechanics of the neck and the arteries that supply the brain, I can't help but worry about what that twisting does to a 70-year-old body. Is this cozy habit actually a recipe for cutting off the very circulation we are trying to protect? And how does this position interact with the breathing issues you've been warning us about?
Jane, the stomach sleeper habit is one of the hardest to break because it is so deeply tied to a sense of comfort. But from a neurological and vascular perspective, it is incredibly risky for seniors. Let me tell you about Linda Chavez. Linda is 74 years old and lives at 88 Lakeview Avenue in St. Paul, Minnesota. She had slept on her stomach for over 50 years. She loved the feeling of being closed off from the world. However, Linda began noticing that every morning she felt incredibly dizzy. A sensation of the room spinning that she dismissed as just a bit of vertigo or getting up too fast. But what was actually happening was more complex. When you sleep on your stomach, you cannot breathe through your pillow, so you have to turn your neck to the extreme left or right. For someone Linda's age, the carotid and vertebral arteries, the main pipes carrying blood to the brain, are often less flexible. By twisting her neck sharply for 8 hours, she was literally kinking those pipes. Furthermore, because she was a slight snorer, being face down made her breathing even more labored. She was creating a state of chronic posterior circulation deficiency. Her brain wasn't getting enough blood or oxygen, leading to that morning longchuang or instability.
It is frightening to think that a position of comfort could be so physically taxing. When Linda felt that dizziness, it was her brain basically screaming that it had been starved of blood all night. Many of our listeners might feel that same spinning sensation or a heavy head in the morning and assume it's an inner ear issue or just a normal part of the aging process. How can they tell the difference? And if they have been sleeping this way for half a century, is it even possible to change? How do you tell a 74-year-old woman that her lifelong security blanket of a position is now a threat to her ability to walk and speak?
It's a difficult conversation, but it's a necessary one. I told Linda that her dizziness wasn't an inner ear problem, it was a delivery problem. Her heart was trying to send blood to the back of her brain, but her neck position was acting like a closed valve. This is especially dangerous for the posterior circulation, which controls balance and coordination. For seniors, the risk of a fall in the morning is a leading cause of loss of independence. If you wake up dizzy because of your sleep position, you are one step away from a hip fracture or a major stroke. To break the habit, I suggested to Linda that she transition to side sleeping. We used body pillows to mimic the feeling of pressure on her stomach so she still felt held and warm, but her neck remained neutral. We also talked about the importance of keeping the neck supported so the arteries remain open. Within 2 weeks of switching to her side with a supportive pillow, her morning dizziness completely vanished. She realized that the cozy feeling of stomach sleeping wasn't worth the price of a spinning room and a starved brain.
It sounds like side sleeping is the hero of this story, but I imagine it has to be done correctly. We don't want people just curling up and crushing their shoulders either. When you talk about keeping the neck neutral, what does that actually look like for someone at home? And for those who worry about the cold, since that's why many lie on their stomachs, how do we ensure they stay warm without resorting to positions that compromise their arteries? Is there a science to the perfect side sleeping setup for someone over 60?
Yes, there is a science to it, Jane. You want a pillow that is exactly the height of your shoulder to ear distance so your spine stays like a straight line. If the pillow is too thin, your head tilts down and kinks the arteries. If it's too thick, it tilts up and does the same. For warmth, I recommend using high-quality thermal blankets or even a safe timed heating pad at the feet rather than using your body position to generate heat. And the goal is to keep the plumbing of the neck as straight as possible. I also tell my patients to place a small pillow between their knees. This aligns the hips and prevents the lower back from twisting, which often makes people want to roll onto their stomachs for relief. For Linda, these small adjustments, the body pillow, the knee pillow, and the right neck support, allowed her to feel just as secure as she did on her stomach, but with the added benefit of waking up with a clear, steady head. It's about working with your anatomy, not against it. We have to remember that at 74, our bodies are much more sensitive to these physical stresses than they were at 24.
Dr. Gupta, when we think about stroke prevention, our minds immediately go to the medicine cabinet. We think about statins for cholesterol, ACE inhibitors for blood pressure, and maybe a baby aspirin. We've been conditioned to believe that if our numbers are good on paper, we are safe. But you are painting a much more complex picture where the medicine is only part of the equation. You've mentioned that even with perfect blood pressure during the day, a person can still be at high risk because of what happens when the lights go out. Could you expand on this disconnect? Why is it that the medical community is now focusing so heavily on the nighttime environment as a primary driver of strokes, even in people who seem healthy by every other metric?
Jane, this is one of the most important shifts in modern neurology. For decades, we focused on the static risks, your weight, your age, your lab results, but we now know that stroke is often a dynamic event. You can have a cholesterol level of 150 and still have a stroke at 5 o'clock a.m. if your oxygen levels are crashing. The American Heart Association has emphasized that obstructive sleep apnea, OSA, is an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease. That means even if you are thin and have good blood pressure, the physical act of stopping breathing at night can damage your heart and brain. In the ER, I see patients who are health nuts. They run, they eat organic, but they snore like a freight train. They don't realize that every time they stop breathing, their body releases a surge of inflammatory markers and stress hormones. This nightly inflammation roughens the inside of the arteries, making it much easier for a clot to stick. So the medicine you take at 8 o'clock a.m. can't fully protect you from the damage you did to your vessels at 2 o'clock a.m.
That is a sobering thought. It's almost as if we are trying to fix a leaky roof while a storm is still raging. If the medicine isn't a total shield, it places a huge amount of responsibility on our nighttime habits. I'm particularly curious about the things we do to help ourselves sleep that might actually be backfiring. For instance, many seniors use a little nightcap, a bit of brandy or wine to settle their nerves, or they take over-the-counter sleep aids. You've suggested that these might be silent killers in their own right. Why is a sleeping pill or a glass of wine so much more dangerous for a 65-year-old brain than it was for a younger one?
It's because those substances are respiratory depressants. When you are young, your brain has a very strong drive to breathe. If your airway narrows, your brain snaps you awake. But alcohol and many sedative sleep medications numb that alarm system. They relax the muscles of the throat even more, making the airway collapse more likely, and then they prevent the brain from realizing it's low on oxygen. So instead of a 5-second pause in breathing, you might have a 30-second pause. For a senior, that prolonged lack of oxygen is devastating. It can trigger an arrhythmia, like atrial fibrillation, which is a major cause of stroke. I tell my patients, if you suspect you have any kind of breathing issue at night, be extremely cautious with anything that sedates you. You want your brain to be awake enough to save your life if you stop breathing. I've seen cases where a simple sleeping pill was the final nudge that turned a mild case of sleep apnea into a full-blown stroke.
It sounds like we need to be very careful about outsourcing our sleep to chemicals. If we can't use alcohol or sedatives and we are worried about our oxygen, it leads back to that fundamental question: how do we know if we are in trouble? You mentioned that if someone has difficult to control blood pressure, they should look at their sleep. That seems like a very specific red flag. If a listener is taking 3 different medications and their blood pressure is still high, is that a sign that the battle in the bedroom is the real culprit?
Absolutely, Jane. This is what we call refractory hypertension. If I have a patient whose blood pressure won't stay down despite good medicine, the first thing I do is order a sleep study. Often, the reason the pressure is high during the day is because the heart and arteries were under siege all night, and the body is stuck in a high-pressure mode just to survive the lack of oxygen. When we treat the sleep apnea, whether with a CPAP machine, a mouth guard, or just a change in position, their daytime blood pressure often drops significantly, sometimes allowing them to reduce their medication. We have to stop thinking of sleep as a break from health and start thinking of it as the foundation. You can't build a healthy life on a foundation of oxygen deprivation. If you're snoring, if you're waking up tired, or if your blood pressure is stubborn, your sleep isn't just a lifestyle issue, it's a medical priority. We need to treat those 8 hours with the same respect we give to a major surgery or intensive drug regimen.
Dr. Gupta, as we move into the 80s, there is a tendency to accept a certain level of decline as just part of the territory. I've heard many families talk about their elderly parents waking up confused or cranky or complaining of a persistent morning headache. They often say, "Well, he's 82, what do you expect?" But you are suggesting that this morning fog isn't a natural byproduct of aging, but rather a symptom of an environment that is literally choking the brain. This brings us to a very common habit: the desire to be snug and protected from drafts by covering the face or head with blankets. Why is this particularly dangerous for someone in their 80s, and how does it manifest in those subtle signs that families often overlook?
Jane, you've touched on a very poignant issue. In the elderly, the brain is like a finely tuned instrument that is much more sensitive to changes in its fuel, which is oxygen. Let me share the story of Richard Coleman. Richard is 82 and lives at 510 Pine Street in Lexington, Kentucky. Richard was a very sharp man, but his daughter noticed he was becoming increasingly forgetful and irritable in the mornings. He often complained of a dull headache that felt like a tight band around his forehead. Richard had a habit of Trumchan Kindao because he felt cold and exposed to the night air. What he didn't realize was that he was creating a rebreathing trap. By covering his face, he was breathing in his own exhaled carbon dioxide. For an 82-year-old, the brain's ability to clear out toxins and maintain pH balance is already strained. Richard was essentially poisoning himself with CO2 every night. This led to nocturnal hypercapnia, which causes the blood vessels in the brain to dilate, creating that throbbing morning headache and that state of low mo or mild confusion that his family mistook for the early stages of dementia.
It is heartbreaking to think that a simple desire for warmth could lead to a misdiagnosis of dementia. Richard's story makes me realize how many seniors might be living in a state of preventable confusion. When you say his brain was sensitive to fuel, it really emphasizes that we need to keep the airways clear at all costs. But many seniors, like Richard, feel genuinely cold. Their circulation isn't what it used to be. If they shouldn't cover their faces and they are afraid of the chilly bedroom air, what is the alternative? How do we keep an 82-year-old man warm and comfortable without letting him suffocate under his own quilts?
This is where we have to be smart about the environment. I told Richard's daughter that we needed to warm the room, not the face. We encourage them to use a humidifier, as dry air often makes the nose feel colder and more congested, leading people to pull up the covers. We also suggested a warm cap, a soft, breathable beanie, to keep the heat from escaping his head while keeping his nose and mouth completely unobstructed. This allowed Richard to feel that sense of snugness without the risk of CO2 buildup. The result was remarkable. After just 3 nights of keeping his face clear and the room at a comfortable, humid temperature, Richard's morning headaches vanished. His confusion cleared up, and he was back to his usual sharp self at the breakfast table. It wasn't dementia, it was just a brain that was tired of breathing stale air. We have to educate families that morning fog is a medical symptom, not a milestone of aging.
That is such a powerful message of hope for families who think they are losing their loved ones to the inevitability of age. It's about the quality of the air. You also mentioned that the brain is nahon, or more sensitive at this age. Does this mean that even a small dip in oxygen, something that wouldn't affect a 50-year-old, could trigger a major event in someone like Richard? Why is the threshold so much lower in our 80s, and what does that mean for how we monitor our elders during the night?
Exactly, Jane. In our 80s, we often have reduced physiological reserve. Our brain cells have less buffer against stress. A small drop in oxygen can cause the heart rate to become irregular or the blood pressure to fluctuate wildly. This is why a quiet, steady night is so crucial. I recommend that families look for those subtle morning signs, the headache, the irritability, the sudden need for a long morning nap. These are clues that the night was a struggle. We don't necessarily need high-tech monitors, we just need to be observant. If a senior is Troomkin under blankets, we need to gently intervene and provide better alternatives for warmth. We have to ensure that the brain has every possible advantage during those vulnerable hours. Protecting Richard's breathing wasn't just about his comfort, it was about preserving his personality, his memory, and his dignity. It's a reminder that at 82, the little things, like the position of a blanket, can have the biggest impact on the quality of life.
Dr. Gupta, we've touched on this a bit, but I want to dive deeper into the common wisdom that might be leading us astray. There's this idea that a cold, dark room is the ideal sleep environment. For a younger person, that might be true, but for someone over 60 whose metabolism has slowed and whose internal thermostat is a bit wonky, I wonder if that extreme cold is actually a stressor. You've mentioned that a room that is too cold can cause mashkolai, a constriction of the vessels, which sounds like a dangerous thing for someone with high blood pressure. How do we find that Goldilocks temperature that supports deep sleep without sending the cardiovascular system into a defensive crouch?
It's a very important distinction to make, Jane. While the general advice is a cool room, for seniors, cool shouldn't mean cold. When the environment is too cold, your body tries to conserve heat by constricting the peripheral blood vessels in your arms and legs. This pushes more blood to your core, which can actually increase your blood pressure. For someone who already has morning surge issues, a freezing room at 4 o'clock a.m. can be the trigger that pushes their pressure into the danger zone. Furthermore, cold air can be reactive for the lungs and nasal passages, making it harder to breathe deeply. I usually recommend a stable temperature around 68 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit for my older patients. It's also about the weight of the blankets. We see many people using extremely heavy old-fashioned quilts because they feel sturdy. But if a blanket is too heavy, it can actually make it harder for an older person to shift positions or expand their chest fully while breathing. A lightweight, high-thermal down comforter is often much safer than 3 layers of heavy wool.
That makes so much sense. The effort of breathing shouldn't be increased by the bedclothes themselves. I'm also thinking about the nighttime ritual many people swear by. Beyond the alcohol we discussed, there's the issue of water. I've noticed that many seniors are so afraid of that middle-of-the-night trip to the bathroom, fear of falling, fear of not being able to get back to sleep, that they stop drinking fluids at 5 o'clock p.m. You've called this a silent mistake. Is it possible that in trying to avoid a fall, they are actually making their blood so thick that they are inviting a stroke? How do we balance the fear of the bathroom with the need for hydration?
This is the hydration tightrope, Jane. When you are dehydrated, your blood volume drops and your blood becomes stickier. This is a major risk factor for ischemic strokes where a clot blocks an artery. If you are taking a diuretic for your blood pressure, this risk is even higher. I tell my patients, do not starve your body of water in the evening. Instead, front-load your hydration in the morning and afternoon, and then have a small, consistent amount of water in the evening, perhaps a 4-ounce glass an hour before bed. And if you do have to get up, that is actually a good thing for your circulation. It gets the blood moving in your legs. The key is to make the path to the bathroom safe. Use motion sensor night lights so you don't have to fumble for a switch, and wear non-slip slippers. We want to avoid the sludge-like blood that comes from extreme dehydration, which when combined with a cold room and a morning surge is a recipe for disaster.
It sounds like moderation and preparation are the themes here. Not too cold, not too heavy, not too dry. It's about creating a neutral environment where the body doesn't have to fight to maintain its temperature or its fluid balance. You've given us so much to think about in terms of the physical bedroom. But what about the internal environment? Many people take their evening medications with a sense of routine, but they don't think about how those meds interact with their sleep position or their breathing. Is there a best practice for timing our health in relation to the pillow?
Timing is everything in medicine. We call it chronotherapy. For example, we know that cholesterol production in the liver peaks at night, which is why many statins are taken in the evening. But for blood pressure, the timing can be even more critical. If you find that your morning numbers are always high, your doctor might suggest moving one of your doses to the evening to protect you during that 4 a.m. surge. However, you must also be aware of how those meds make you feel. If a medication makes you extremely drowsy or heavy, it might worsen your sleep apnea. My advice is to have a sleep-focused conversation with your pharmacist or doctor. Ask them, how does this pill affect my breathing at night? And is this the best time to take it to protect my brain in the morning? We want your medical regimen to work in harmony with your sleep, not against it. By aligning your environment, your hydration, and your timing, you create a safety net that guards you while you are most vulnerable.
Dr. Gupta, we often see a very common sight in American homes, the recliner sleeper. Many seniors, as they deal with chronic back pain, hip issues, or even acid reflux, find that they simply cannot get comfortable in a traditional bed. They find that sleeping in the chair is the only way to get a few hours of peace. It feels like a smart adaptation. I'm sitting up, so I must be breathing better and my back doesn't hurt. But you've warned that this sitting posture for 8 hours can create a different set of dangers, particularly for circulation in the legs and the stability of blood pressure. Can you tell us about the hidden risks of the recliner and how we can help those who truly struggle with pain to find a safer way to rest?
Jane, the recliner is a double-edged sword. I completely understand why people use them. The comfort is real. But let me tell you about Barbara Whitman. Barbara is 79 and lives at 1302 Oak Ridge Lane in Louisville, Kentucky. Barbara had severe arthritis in her hips and found that lying flat in bed was agonizing. So she started sleeping in her plush recliner every night. She thought she was doing herself a favor. However, Barbara began noticing that her ankles were becoming incredibly puffy by the end of the day, and she felt a strange heaviness in her legs. One morning, she tried to stand up from the chair and felt a sudden wave of weakness and a pins and needles sensation that didn't go away. What Barbara didn't realize was that by sleeping gap ngui, with her hips bent at a sharp angle for hours, she was slowing down the return of blood from her legs to her heart. This stagnant blood can lead to small clots, or at the very least a significant drop in effective blood volume when she finally tried to stand up. Furthermore, while she thought sitting up helped her breathing, the slumped position of a recliner can actually compress the diaphragm, making breaths shallower.
It's a classic case of solving one problem but creating another. Barbara was just trying to escape the pain of her arthritis, but she was accidentally putting her vascular system in a kinked position. For our listeners who are currently using a recliner because they feel they have no other choice, what is the safer version of this? If they need that elevation for their reflux or their back, how do they achieve it without slumping or cutting off the circulation in their hips? Is there a way to transition back to a bed that still offers that same relief?
The key is uniform elevation rather than a hinge. I told Barbara that the problem wasn't the elevation, but the V shape her body was making in the chair. This shape is what restricts the blood flow in the lungs. We moved her back to a bed, but introduced a wedge pillow or an adjustable bed frame. These allow the entire torso to be raised as a single unit, usually at a 20 to 30 degree angle. This gives the benefits of reduced reflux and easier breathing without the hip kink of a recliner. In clinical settings, we often use a 30-degree elevation because it helps with venous drainage, helping the blood flow back from the brain and the lower body more efficiently. We also encourage Barbara to do ankle pumps, flexing her feet back and forth before she even tried to stand up to get the blood moving. Within a few weeks of using a wedge in her bed, the swelling in her legs subsided, and she felt much more stable in the mornings.
It sounds like the wedge is a much more sophisticated tool than the recliner. I'm also struck by your mention of standing up. For seniors, that transition from sleeping to standing is such a high-risk moment. If they have been in a recliner or even if they've been in a bed, their blood pressure has to adjust to gravity instantly. Why is this so much harder for a 79-year-old body, and what should be the morning ritual to ensure they don't trigger a fainting spell or a cardiovascular event the moment their feet hit the floor?
This is about orthostatic hypotension, the sudden drop in blood pressure when you stand up. As we age, our baroreceptors, the sensors that tell our heart to beat faster when we stand, get a little sluggish. If you have been sleeping in a slumped recliner or if you are dehydrated, your body is even less prepared for that change. I recommend the pause and pump method. First, sit on the edge of the bed for a full 2 minutes. Don't just pop up. While you are sitting, do those ankle pumps I mentioned. Drink a few sips of water. This gives your heart and your vessels time to wake up and adjust the pressure. For Barbara, this ritual became as important as her coffee. It ensured that her brain was fully perfused with blood before she took her first step. We have to treat the act of waking up as a gradual process, not a sudden switch. By combining the right sleeping angle with a slow, deliberate morning transition, we can prevent those accidental events that so often happen in the first 5 minutes of the day. It's about being gentle with a system that has been working hard all night to keep you safe.
Dr. Gupta, we are coming into the home stretch of our conversation, and I want to focus on that specific window of time, 3 o'clock a.m. to 6 o'clock a.m. You've called this the fragile hour for the brain. It's the time when the world is at its quietest, but for many seniors, it's the time of maximum internal stress. We've talked about the morning surge and the oxygen dips, but I want to understand the why behind this specific timing. Is it just about the sun coming up, or is there a deeper biological clock that makes the human brain over 60 particularly vulnerable during these 3 hours? And more importantly, if we know this is the danger zone, how do we harden our defenses during that specific window?
It's a fascinating area of circadian biology, Jane. Our bodies operate on a 24-hour rhythm, and the hours between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock a.m. are when several biological curves intersect in a risky way. First, your body temperature is usually at its lowest point. Second, your blood clotting factors are naturally higher in the early morning, an evolutionary trait to protect us from bleeding out if we were attacked by a predator at dawn. Third, as I mentioned, the morning surge of hormones like cortisol and adrenaline begins. For a healthy young person, this is just the engine starting up. But for someone over 60, especially if they have been gasping for air due to OSA or have stiff arteries, this is the time when a plaque is most likely to rupture or a clot is most likely to form. This is why the AHA journals have published so much research on the early morning peak of strokes and heart attacks. It is literally the most mongman, or fragile state, our brain will be in all day.
It sounds like a perfect storm that happens every single morning. If we know the storm is coming at 4 o'clock a.m., we can't just stay awake to watch it. We have to have our defenses already in place. You've talked about 3 golden actions we can take. I want to dive into these with absolute clarity for our listeners. If they are sitting there right now, perhaps feeling a bit overwhelmed by the science, what are the 3 most critical, non-negotiable things they should do before they turn out the light tonight to protect themselves during that 3 to 6 a.m. window?
I want everyone to take a deep breath and realize that these golden actions are about empowerment, not fear. The oxygen check. If you know you snore or if your partner says you stop breathing, do not wait. Ask your doctor for a home sleep test. If you are diagnosed with OSA, use your treatment, whether it's a CPAP or a dental device, especially during those early morning hours. That oxygen is the shield for your brain. 2, the 20-degree rule. Stop sleeping flat on your back. Use a wedge pillow or elevate the head of your bed by about 6 inches. This uses gravity to keep your airway open and helps with the drainage from your brain. Think of it as straightening the pipes. 3. The hydration and med sync. Don't go to bed dehydrated and talk to your doctor about the timing of your blood pressure medicine. If you can dampen that morning surge with a well-timed evening dose, you are taking the sting out of that 4 o'clock a.m. hormone spike. These 3 things combined create a safety buffer that allows your body to transition from sleep to wakefulness without a crisis.
These feel very doable. They aren't high-tech or expensive. They are about discipline and self-love, as you put it. I'm particularly interested in that discipline part. Many seniors are caregivers themselves, or they have very busy lives, and they might think, I'll do it tomorrow. How do we emphasize the urgency? This isn't like a diet where you can start on Monday. This is about protecting your very humanity, your ability to speak, to remember to be yourself, starting tonight. How do you help your patients find the willpower to make these changes when they are tired and just want to go to sleep?
I tell them to think about their why. Why do you want to stay healthy? Is it to see your granddaughter graduate? Is it to keep tending your garden? A stroke doesn't just happen. It changes who you are. It steals your independence. I tell my patients, tonight you are the guardian of your own brain. It takes 5 minutes to set up a wedge pillow. It takes 30 seconds to drink a glass of water. It takes 1 phone call to schedule a sleep study. These are small investments that pay a massive dividend in the morning. I want people to wake up and say, I am here, I am clear, and I am ready for the day. That feeling of a safe morning is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself. We have to move past the it won't happen to me mindset and embrace the I am protecting myself mindset. Every night is an opportunity to recharge the brain safely, and that 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock a.m. window is when that protection matters most.
Dr. Gupta, we have reached the end of this journey, and I find myself looking at the act of sleeping in a completely different light. It's no longer just a period of nothingness, and it's a profound act of stewardship. You have seen the consequences when this goes wrong, the morning after that changes everything. But you've also seen the success stories, the Richards and Lindas and Barbaras who made small changes and reclaimed their vitality. As we wrap up, what is the one human message you want to leave with our listeners? Beyond the science and the data, what is the heart of why we need to pay attention to these silent hours?
Jane, in my career, I have performed thousands of brain surgeries, and I have seen the incredible fragility and the incredible resilience of the human mind. What I have learned is that who we are, our memories, our laughter, our ability to hold a hand is all tied to the health of our neural pathways. When we protect our sleep, we aren't just avoiding a medical event, we are protecting ourselves. I have seen too many families sitting in waiting rooms wishing they could go back in time and change one small habit, one sleeping position, one glass of water, one doctor's visit. My message is simple. You still have the power of now. You have the power to choose how you enter the night. Think of your brain as a precious library. Every night, if you don't provide enough oxygen, a few pages of your books get burned. Over years, you lose whole chapters. But if you provide that steady flow of air and maintain that stable pressure, you preserve the entire collection for decades to come. Ngu Khon Nguyen isn't just a health tip, it's a way to ensure you can Song Tran Ven for all the mornings to come.
Preserving the library, that is a beautiful and urgent way to think about it. I want to thank you, Dr. Gupta, for your time, your expertise, and most of all, for your compassion. You've taken a subject that can be very scary and turned it into a roadmap for a better, safer life. For everyone listening, I hope you take these 3 golden actions to heart tonight. Remember, 1, check your oxygen if you snore. 2, elevate your head by 20 to 30 degrees. And 3, stay hydrated and sync your medications with your doctor's advice. Don't let your tonight steal your tomorrow. It has been a privilege to share this space with you, Dr. Gupta.
The privilege was all mine, Jane. Thank you for giving a voice to these silent risks. To everyone at home, please take care of yourselves. Your brain is a masterpiece. Make sure it has what it needs to shine every morning. Thank you for listening, and I wish you all a very safe and restorative night. Good night, and may you wake up feeling your very best.
Thank you for joining us on Healthy Kidneys After 60. This has been a conversation that I believe will save lives, and I am so grateful you were part of it. If you found this information helpful, please subscribe to our podcast and share it with the people you love. We have many more deep dives into the secrets of healthy aging coming your way, and we don't want you to miss a single one. Until next time, I'm Jane Pauley. Sleep well, breathe deeply, and we will see you in the next episode.